So, sexual fantasy is any mental image or thought that creates sexual arousal or is erotic to an individual. Fantasy is something that happens entirely in a person's mind. Fantasy is a universal phenomenon. There are studies that show that 95% of men and women report having some sort of sexual fantasy. However, it is far less common that fantasy is actually put into action. Fantasy allows people to live a role that they may not be able to in real life. There's a wide spectrum of what fantasy can be. It can be a quick, fleeting thought that just pops into a person's mind, or it can be an elaborate story that a person revisits often. Fantasy can be a memory of a sexual experience with a past or current partner, or it can be a completely imagined scenario that has never happened to the individual. Fantasy can be triggered by anything from certain objects, people, places, or it can be something that just pops into a person's mind. A fantasy can be a positive or negative experience for the individual. A positive note fantasy allows a person to explore their sexuality, or as will be discussed further, fantasies can create guilt within a person. The three most common sexual fantasies are reliving a sexual experience, sex with a current partner, or sex with a different partner. And then the other common fantasies are oral sex, sex in a romantic location, or forced sex. Looking at the circles of sexuality, fantasy is part of the sensuality circle. Fantasy allows people to become aware of themselves and what they enjoy. Fantasy allows people to act on different scenarios in their mind without having to perform them in real life in order to discover their likes and dislikes. And it can also help an individual to discover what they like and don't like. Looking at the social justice model, fantasy can be used to combat the forms of oppression in our society, such as heterosexism and homophobia. Through fantasy, an individual can have sexual experience that they may be afraid to try in real life due to society norms and expectations. For example, women can experience power that society doesn't always give her, or a person can fantasize about a same-sex relationship that they may have been afraid to try in real life. Fantasy also allows people to cope with trauma such as rape or sexual assault. A person can relive the situation with a different outcome, giving themselves power and control. There is research that shows that there are feelings of guilt associated with sexual fantasy, which also plays into the society norms, expectations, and privilege. People report feeling abnormal, immoral, or they're like there's something wrong with their relationship because of fantasy, when in reality, fantasy is an extremely common experience. This brings us to trauma-informed care. We can use trauma-informed care in order to promote fantasy as a normal part of sexuality. With the safety aspect, as discussed, it can help individuals overcome and cope with trauma. Through choice, it allows individuals to explore different aspects of their sexuality and to discover what they like and don't like. Trustworthiness, by promoting fantasy as a normal part of sexuality, it can allow people to share their fantasies with their partners and maybe act on more fantasies than they would have in the past. Through collaboration, we can create an environment where fantasy is normal and accepted and is a part of sexuality and sensuality. And through empowerment, it can allow people to explore themselves and their sexuality and also take on a new role that they may not be able to experience in real life.